بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي ونسلم على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. We get started then inshallah, continuing with our study on أيها الولد and the series that we are looking at, which is Imam Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala. In the previous session we discussed some of the ideas Imam Ghazali touches on in regard to this idea of ignorance, and Imam Ghazali will just reiterate some of these ideas. He says اعلم أن مرض الجهل على أربعة أنواع, the idea of ignorance or the disease of ignorance, because ignorance is actually a disease. You know, there's this idea that not knowing ideas or core ideas of your faith, it's something that's okay or deemed as okay. It's not. That's a level of ignorance that we need to fix. And so Imam Ghazali says that the disease of ignorance is of four types. أحدها يقبل العلاج والباقي لا يقبل. That the first type of ignorance, you can cure it. However, the remaining three types of ignorance, there's no cure for them. You won't find a cure for it. So he starts with أما الذي لا يقبل العلاج, the level of ignorance which is incurable. فأحدها من كان سؤاله واعتراضه عن حسده وبغضه. That individual, and we studied this in the previous session, that individual who questions or who asks a question. Remember, ignorance is something that you don't know. And so the only way that you will know is by asking a question, by being inquisitive. And so you have to ask a question to clear that ignorance. However, if your questioning is out of envy, it's out of hate, it's out of malice, and حسده وبغضه, then فكلما تجيبه بأحسن الجواب وأفصحه وأوضحه فلا يزيد له ذلك إلا بغضا وعداوة وحسدا. That you can respond in the best of manners, in the most clearest of forms, in the most eloquent and most evident of responses, but it only increases them in hatred, hostility, and envy. Because the better, the more proficient of a response you give, the more annoyed they'll be. Like, oh, I was trying to get them out. I was trying to get them to trip over. And now they actually gave a better response. So that actually, rather than you increasing you in knowledge or increasing you in humility, actually makes you even angrier that, oh, how did he manage to give a response? What's this all about? And so it makes them upset. فَالطَّرِيقُ أَلَّا تَشْتَغِلَ بِجَوَابِهِ, the modus operandi, the method of operation with these such individuals is not to engage in response to them. Don't even give them the time of day. فَقَدْ قِيلَ, and the poet mentions, كُلُّ الْعَدَاوَةِ قَدْ تُرْجَى إِزَالَتُهَا, every form of hostility, every form of enmity, there is a hope that تُرْجَى إِزَالَتُهَا, that there is a hope that you can end it or you can reconcile it in some way. إِلَّا عَدَاوَةَ مَنْ عَادَاكَ عَنْ حَسَدِ, except for that individual who shows hostility to you as a result of envy. And so Imam Ghazali rahimahullah says ignorance is of four types. The first type, which is extremely detrimental to an individual, and it will not allow them to grow. Even if they ask a question, the response might be given correctly, but it will that will anger them as well. That why did he give such a perfect response? Why did he give a good response? You know, they wanted you to fail. فَيَنْبَغِي أَن تُعْرِضَ عَنْهُ, the advice is you should avoid them. وَتَتْرُكَهُ مَعَ مَرَضِهِ, and leave them with their illness. قال الله تعالى, Allah says this in the Quran, فَأَعْرِضْ عَمَّنْ تَوَلَّى عَنْ ذِكْرِنَا وَلَمْ يُرِدْ إِلَّا الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا. That فَأَعْرِضْ, turn away and kind of distance yourself, عَمَّنْ تَوَلَّى عَنْ ذِكْرِنَا, from that individual who has turned away from our dhikr, from our remembrance. That individual who doesn't want to remember us, but wants to use the forms of remembrance. He wants to use the classroom, or he wants to use the mosque, or he wants to use different kind of ideas of the faith, but not to remember us, but to cause hostility, or to cause disagreements, or to cause fights, or to cause disagreements, or to achieve something of this world, either to get some honor and to get some fame, or to get some money, or to get some wealth. That individual who uses this religion not for the dhikr of Allah, but وَلَمْ يُرِدْ إِلَّا الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا, they want the life of this world, then turn away from them. والحسود بكل ما يقول ويفعل يوقد النار في الزرع عمله. That the person who's jealous, that individual who's a hasud, not just the jealous, hasid is the word for jealous. Hasud is that one who is brimming and kind of frothing and bubbling with hatred and malice and jealousy. بكل ما يقول ويفعل يوقد النار في زرع عمله. Every single one of his statements and actions will be a means of furthering the flames that will be damaging and affecting his deeds. And they will be, these flames will be engulfing their good deeds. كما قال النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام. And Ghazali says, and he claims it's a narration of the Prophet, peace be upon him, الحسد يأكل الحسنات كما تأكل النار الحطب. That jealousy burns away at good deeds just as fire burns away and devours and eats and consumes that firewood. So he says that's the first level of ignorance. والثاني, the second level of ignorance, أن تكون علته من الحماقة. That your kind of ignorance it's as a result of foolishness. It's as a result of idiocy. It's as a result of being foolish. وهو أيضا لا يقبل العلاج. And this person too you can't cure them. You can't cure حماقة. You can't cure foolishness. كما قال عيسى عليه الصلاة والسلام. Isa عليه السلام mentions إني ما عجزت عن إحياء الموتى وقد عجزت عن معالجة الأحمق. Imam Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala is quoting a statement from Isa alayhi salatu wassalam, which Allah knows best the veracity of the statement. As far as the veracity of the statement is concerned, I can mention a few comments on it at a later stage, inshallah. But he mentions that Isa alayhi salatu wassalam says in a somewhat of a kind of in jest, but also for us to take a lesson. إني ما عجزت عن إحياء الموتى. Look, with the help of Allah, I was able to bring the dead to life. That's something Allah gave Isa alayhi salam the ability to do through the will of Allah. It wasn't it was a miracle. وقد عجزت عن معالجة الأحمق. However, even I was incapable of curing the fool. Somebody who is foolish, somebody who doesn't want to see the error of their ways, there's nothing you can do to help them. وذلك رجل يشتغل بطلب العلم زمنا قليلا. And who is the foolish person? You can't just say he's a fool or he's somebody who's an idiot or something like that. You need to define these terms. You can't just start pointing to people, or else people will start using them however they want. And so how does Imam Ghazali then define the word foolish? He says, look, what are the signs of somebody who's foolish when it comes to studying knowledge? وذلك رجل, this is such an individual, يشتغل بطلب العلم زمنا قليلا. They begin on this pursuit of knowledge and studying for a very small amount of time, very minor amount of time. ويتعلم شيئا من العلم العقلي والشرعي. And they studied a little bit of different sciences. They studied the sciences and they got a bit of aqli knowledge, like knowledges of philosophy or shari'i, and they studied a bit of religious knowledge. So they've got a bit of a few different things. فيسأل ويعترض من حماقته على العالم الكبير الذي مضى عمره في العلوم العقلية والشرعية. And this individual gathered a few of the preliminary sciences of the faith. And after getting some of the preliminary sciences, out of their foolishness, they now go and not just question, but they go and interrogate. They go and pose kind of arrogant questions in front of scholars, and not just normal scholars. على العالم الكبير, scholars who have spent الذي مضى عمره في العلوم العقلية والشرعية, somebody who has spent their entire life in studying the religion. And so what happens is sometimes you'll see this where somebody will learn a little something. They might go on one course, or they might go on a little kind of a weekend kind of intensive or something like that, maybe an aqidah course, maybe a fiqh course, maybe a different courses. After studying a little bit, they will now feel that they are armed sufficiently to go up to scholars and say to them, oh, but you believe this and I believe this, and this is what this scholar says and this is what that scholar says, not knowing that you have but a few leaves on the branches of the knowledge, if that. You've amassed a few leaves and you're going up to somebody that's a tree. What concern are your leaves to somebody who is a fully fledged tree with roots and branches and fruits and all of these things? And so Imam Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala is saying that individual who يطلب العلم زمنا قليلا, for a short amount of time studies a bit of knowledge, ويتعلم شيئا من العلم العقلي. We're not denying they amassed some forms of learning, and even that, by the way, it was given to them. Somebody else had to do all the gathering and present it to them in a course, and now they have this little bit of knowledge. فَيَسْأَلُ, they begin to question and they begin to kind of interrogate scholars. وَيَعْتَرِضُ مِنْ حَمَاقَتِهِ عَلَى الْعَالِمِ الْكَبِيرِ, and they now come to question senior scholars. الَّذِي مَضَّى عُمُرَهُ فِي الْعُلُومِ الْعَقْلِيَّةِ وَالشَّرْعِيَّةِ, who have spent the entire life studying these kind of not just preliminary sciences, but the more technical sciences, the deeper sciences, and the more intricate sciences of this faith. وهذا الأحمق لا يعلم ويظن أن ما أشكل عليه هو أيضا مشكل على العالم الكبير. And this individual doesn't realize, and Imam Ghazali is not, he's not going to sugarcoat this. He says, this fool, this absolute fool, this idiot, لا يعلم. And it's ahmaq isn't a nice term. It's not supposed to be used in a nice way. But we're not saying to anybody, you are an idiot. We're saying that you want to avoid this term of foolish. You want to avoid this term of being somebody who's, given this label. And so the foolish individual, لا يعلم, they don't even realize, out of their stupidity, they don't even realize, and they think that when they go to the great scholars and they ask them, and the scholars might respond with something like, this is not for you at this stage, or this does not concern you, or these conversations are not advisable for you to delve into. وَيَظُنُّ, he starts to think big of himself. أَنَّ مَا أُشْكِلَ عَلَيْهِ هُوَ أَيْضًا مُشْكِلٌ عَلَى الْعَالِمِ الْكَبِيرِ. That those things that he thinks that, these things I found problematic, even the scholar is finding problematic. Even he doesn't have an answer to this. See, nobody has an answer to this. This is, I'm something now. I'm something. So the first level of ignorance which Imam Ghazali speaks of, is somebody who is envious, somebody who is jealous, somebody who is malice. So that's definitely an illness of the heart. Then the next level of ignorance which Imam Ghazali speaks of, which cannot be cured, is that individual who is somewhat arrogant. They have studied a very small amount of knowledge. And remember, knowledge is something that humbles you. Knowledge is something that, opens up kind of the vastness of how much there is. And you begin to realize that actually there's a lot more than I thought, and it should humble you, right? It's not something where you study it and suddenly, now that's it, this is the be-all end-all, I'm ready to go out and debate and discuss. And no, it should actually humble an individual. And so this individual who studied very small ideas and concepts of the faith and very limited ideas now goes around and starts questioning other people, starts kind of imposing these ideas onto other people, saying, do you know what this is? Do you know what that is? Do you know what this is? And you ask them some basics, something very basic about the faith, and they won't know. But they've kind of specialized in this small little niche kind of few questions, a few ideas, and they now go up to senior scholars and they'll say, go on, then what's the response to this? And the senior scholars aren't going to respond, because there's this concept in the religion, al-ahammu fal-aham, that you don't start at that level. Al-ahammu fal-aham, there are certain things that are preliminary, and you start with those, and then you build on your kind of repertoire of knowledge and your learning and your practice. You don't go straight into the deep end and start, kind of combining ideas which you wouldn't even be able to comprehend without even having the sciences of Arabic and other preliminary sciences. And so Imam Ghazali rahmatullah says this person is a fool, right? Because وَيَظُنُّ أَنَّمَا أُشْكِلَ عَلَيْهِ وَأَيْضًا مُشْكِلٌ عَلَى الْعَالِمِ الْكَبِيرِ, that he's struggling with my questions. He doesn't realize that there's a reason he's not responding. فَإِذَا لَمْ يَعْلَمْ هَذَا الْقَدْرِ يَكُونُ سُؤَالُهُ مِنَ الْحَمَاقَةِ. If he does not come to appreciate even this much, that his question is based in foolishness, فَيَنْبَغِي أَلَّا تَشْتَغِلَ بِجَوَابِهِ, then Imam Ghazali says you should not even engage this individual. Try and explain to this individual, no problem, that this is not of a priority for you. And this was, by the way, this isn't something new. In the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet, peace be upon him, was asked certain questions. He sallallahu alaihi wasallam would sometimes respond according to the questioner. Somebody would ask regarding the time of the final hour. The Prophet ﷺ wouldn't entertain conversations in regard to, the hour will be when these signs have occurred, because he knows the individual probably knows the signs of the hour. The Prophet ﷺ could have said, these are, somebody asked him, what are the signs of the hour? He could have responded, these are the minor signs, these are the major signs, and this is what leads up. He didn't. He could have said, well, I don't know the precise. He didn't. He knew that individual, and he targeted them and says, مَا أَعْتَدْتَ لَهَا, what have you prepared for the final hour? And so he was not just somebody who was the Prophet ﷺ wasn't just an encyclopedia of knowledge where you just come, ask a question, and he gives you the answer. He was assessing you as an individual. He was then calibrating what's good for you, what's bad for you, and what kind of a response is suited to you. It may not answer your question, but it will actually give you an understanding of what you need to focus on. The Prophet, peace be upon him, answered a question with a question. And when's the final hour? He says, what have you prepared for it? Meaning, he completely ignored his question. I said, what have you prepared for it? And so that understanding that scholars will not always engage with a question because the question, not because it's difficult or not because it's something, which is controversial or something which is kind of, it may be the reason. And scholars will say, Allah Alam, I don't know, I can find out for you. But often a question is asked which isn't always given a response to. Let us understand that are we in that category of being a fool, where we think that we have a legitimate question and we think that we have, but the way we're wording the question, the person that we're going to, and the kind of ideas behind it, is there a reason they're not responding to my question? This could be one of the reasons. وَالثالث, the third reason, أن يكون مسترشدا, that somebody comes and is seeking guidance, right? مسترشدا. وكل ما لا يفهم من كلام الأكابر يحمل على قصور فهمه وكان سؤاله للاستفادة. That an individual comes, an individual asks a question and seeks certain guidance in regard to a matter, and everything that the individual does not understand from the great scholars have said something, whatever he does not understand, then يحمل على قصور فهمه, he then puts it down to the deficiency of his own knowledge. And وكان سؤاله للاستفادة لكن يكون بليدا لا يدرك الحقائق. So he then says, you read something, you study something, and you don't understand it. So this individual, the first individual was arrogant. The first individual was arrogant. He had a level of pride. He's unwilling to accept that he could be wrong. This individual studying is non-critical. So everything they study something and it seems problematic, but they say, no. It's probably me who's misunderstood it. No. Let me carry on reading it. It must be me who's wrong. So وَكُلُّ مَا لَا يَفْهَمْ مِنْ كَلَامِ الْأَكَابِرِ, everything he does not understand, everything she does not understand from the works of the great scholars, يُحْمَلُ عَلَى قُصُورِ فَهْمِهِ, they put the blame on themselves and say, it's probably my weakness of understanding. I probably don't understand it. It can't be wrong. وَكَانَ سُؤَالُهُ لِلْإِسْتِفَادَةِ, that his questioning is to learn. لَكِنْ يَكُونُ بَلِيدًا, but his questioning it's not sharp enough, it's not intelligent enough to say لا يدرك الحقائق. He's unable to grasp the realities. He should be asking, could this be problematic? Could this comment from this book that I'm reading, I'm sorry, I don't understand it. Can you please explain it? And so if you don't understand something, you should ask. It doesn't mean that you're deficient in your learning. It's possible that there might be a mistake. There might be a mistake in the print, right? So many times when we were studying in our student days, what happens is obviously when you're studying books, Islamic books, especially in Arabic, you've got to, when somebody publishes a book, right, especially in the Arab world, anywhere, you're publishing not one, you're publishing a bunch of them. Right? So you're going to be publishing maybe 1,000 books or 2,000 books or 5,000 books or whatever. And you have to think about the business side of things, because if you've gone and typed up an entire book, there's a lot of work that's gone into that. So that's pay. You've got to pay somebody for doing that typing. You've got to pay somebody for that work. If it's a personal project, fine, but generally you're paying individuals. And then for you to send it through that mass production of printing, where you're printing these pages, then you're kind of, putting them together. You've got a binding and you've got the cover and all of these things, and you've got to sell all of them. So really, you'd only really publish the books that are going to sell. You're not going to publish all sorts of other works. Some smaller scale publishers in the Arab world, what they do is they will actually print and publish books that might not be so commonly sold. And so they might get a few, 100 copies of this or 500 copies of this or, 50,000 copies, which would still be a small amount really, but 10,000 copies of something, and they would produce that. Now, what you have to understand is, to reduce those costs, you might not have a proofreader. To reduce those costs, you might have somebody young who's just kind of doing it and making a little bit of money, who's doing all of the typing for you. And so you'll often find a lot of mistakes in the typing because they've got to read from something and they've got to transcribe something. And so sometimes, letters will be written differently. And in Arabic, obviously, dots are very important. So you might have a letter which has a ha instead of, or a dot underneath, which is a jim. So one of the books, I don't want to mention the publishers, but I'll mention them. There's a publisher by the name of DKI, and they do amazing publishings, right? In terms of books that you might not get published by other bigger kind of outlets or publishers. And so DKI, what they do is they publish a lot of the kind of rarer books as well, but their printing isn't always the best in terms of the typing of it. But again, you have to acknowledge that they are going out of their way to publish those books other people wouldn't, which is a huge asset to the ummah. But sometimes you'll come across mistakes in all publishers. But one of the specific texts of this book that I had, there was a scholar's name, and after it, they write Rahimahullah with a ha. And obviously, if you replace that ha with a jim, it can completely change the meaning to mean, instead of may Allah shower mercy on this individual, may Allah stone this individual. Now, of course, it's not, intentional, it's a mistake. But what I'm saying is sometimes this can happen where you can find errors inside books. And so what Imam Ghazali over here is saying is, don't always assume that it's your lack of understanding. It's possible that there is an error in the book or the text or what you are hearing. And so be a level of critical. But when you're critical, you don't go to the arrogant extreme where you assume that you are always right and you assume that somebody else is wrong. But you don't go to the other extreme of shyness and kind of meekness to an extent where you are the one that's wrong always. There's no possibility that somebody else might have made a mistake. And so that level, finding that balance of inquisition where you are humble enough in your approach and you say, I'm sorry, I don't understand this text. Can you explain it to me? And so Imam Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala says that you need to find that balance. You need to find that balance between these two kind of ideas. And Imam Ghazali says this person will not benefit either. And we know this. We've heard countless scholars, classical scholars, saying that the arrogant person and the shy person will never benefit. Why? The arrogant person, they feel that they have all of the knowledge. So why do I need to ask a question? I already know. And the shy person, they're too embarrassed to ask a question. And so that shyness and that embarrassment will hold you back from learning, because the scholars say, husnu su'ali nisful ilm, that a good question, a question which is insightful and perceptive, is half of the knowledge, because by asking that question, it will quench your thirst of the response. And so it's very important to find that balance. And then Imam Ghazali says, so there was 3 levels of ignorance as mentioned so far. The first, which is an ignorance which stems out of jealousy. That you don't ask questions to learn, you ask questions to try and bring somebody down. And you ask questions because you hate that individual, you're jealous of them. So you're trying to get a got you moment. And so, you're trying to ask a question and they get it wrong and you say, got you there. That kind of individual, they won't learn. The second is that individual who's arrogant. They study a little bit, right? They study a few sciences and now they feel that they have mastered that science. And they go to other individuals who are less learned than them in that science, who may have more understanding in other sciences. They might not have specialized in this science, but they have the knowledge of faith in other things, but you impose your knowledge onto them. And you say, do you know about this? Do you know about this? Do you know about this? Or what about this question? What about this answer? And so they feel that they can impose that on an individual. The third level of individual is that individual who always puts the blame on themselves and thinks that, no, maybe I'm misunderstanding. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I'm, not able to understand. Maybe I'm not intelligent enough. Maybe I'm not able to comprehend. Maybe I'm not smart enough. All of these things, and they're kind of questioning themselves constantly. That individual can't benefit either. And this individual will lose out as well. But the fourth type of ignorance, Imam Ghazali says, which is curable, which there is a cure for. Remember, ignorance is not a sin. Ignorance, every single individual is born ignorant. It's then fixing that, curing that ignorance. And the only cure for ignorance is knowledge, is seeking knowledge. And so Imam Ghazali says, وَأَمَّا الْمَرَضُ الَّذِي يَقْبَلُ الْعِلَاجِ, that ignorance and that illness of ignorance which can be cured, فَهُوَ أَن يَكُونَ مُسْتَرْشِدًا عَاقِلًا فَهِمًا, is that individual who is seeking guidance, who is seeking an answer. عَاقِلًا فَهِمًا, they are understanding. and they are intelligent. Intelligent doesn't mean you have a high IQ. Intelligence can often mean that you know who you need to approach to ask this question to. You know how to ask the question. You don't need to know the answer. You don't. That's why you're asking the question. But it's understanding who's the right person for this field. I'm not going to go to a YouTube comment section on a video of, I don't know, some Quranic recitation to ask a fiqh question that I have in my day-to-day life, because it could be anybody responding, and it might be a scholar responding. I don't know. So it wouldn't be seen as the epitome of peak intelligence for a person to ask there. But it would be intelligent to go to somebody who is in the mosque and who's been placed in a position of authority, because it's understood that the entire community believes in the consensus of this individual to some extent, and he has gone through a process of being kind of judged in terms of being there in that position. And so it would make a little more sense to go to that individual than to some sort of an unknown source. And so then when you go to that individual, there's a method of asking. There's a time of asking. So you're not going to ask when the imam's about to go and stand up for the salah and they're about to lead the prayer, and you go and ask the question there, and they're like, I'm about to lead the prayer. What do you expect me to do? What do you want me to say? So that's a level of intelligence that you require. And then how to word that question. There's a way of walking up to somebody and saying, oh, yeah, I've got a question here. Basically, I don't think this is right. And there's a way of saying, sorry, can you please explain? I don't understand this. And you'll understand, you'll see the response, the two responses to two individuals who ask the same question in different ways. You'll see a difference in response. You'll see a difference in response. If you're insolent and, to an individual and asking a question, then don't expect them to be, all loving and compassionate when responding. That's not how it works. And so intelligence, aqilan, doesn't mean you have all the answers or you're smart or this or that. Intelligence is you know how to approach that question, and you know who to go to. You're not going to go to the wrong people. Fahiman, and they are understanding. They are understanding. That they are understanding in terms of, this is a lengthy question, so I'm going to need a bit more time. If somebody says to me, you know what, this question, it's a bit more complex for you at this stage, focus on this. There will come a time when you will get that question answered, because you may not have the kind of foundational understanding or acumen that is required for that response. And this isn't a disrespectful thing. This is something which is, you can't expect to go up to a kind of a PhD student of physics and start asking them, can you explain to me the intricacies of quarks or something like that? And they'll be like, do you know what a quark is? They'll be, no. Do you know what an atom is? No. So how can I speak to you about something which is a subdivision of a topic which you don't even know the preliminary ideas of? It makes no sense. They'd say, look, I don't think it's of use to you. And if a scholar says that, we'll be like, oh, they don't know, or they don't want to teach me. But you have to understand, you have to be fahiman. لا يكون مغلوب الحسد والغضب. You cannot be an individual who is overwhelmed with envy or anger. These two things cannot be within you. You cannot be an envious individual when you are seeking knowledge. You cannot be asking that question whilst being envious of this individual. And envious is fine. There's levels of envy and jealousy. Some jealousy is good, some envy is good, and some jealousy and envy is bad. If you're jealous or envious of an individual, wishing that you were like them, that's not a bad thing. Allah has given somebody wealth and they are spending in the path of Allah, and you want to be like that individual. Allah has given somebody wealth, they're not even spending in the path of Allah, but they have a comfortable life and you wish to be like, that's not wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. And you make dua, oh Allah, grant this to me as well. But jealousy and envy, which is harmful, is when you don't care about having it. You care about bringing that person down. That why does he have it? Why does she have it? I don't want them to have it. And yeah, maybe you do want it, but you don't want them to have it. So even that's bad. But fine, you wanting it is not an issue. But don't wish ill on somebody else. And you cannot be overwhelmed with anger. You cannot be filled with anger and rage when seeking knowledge. You want some piece of knowledge, you want to learn something, you want to study something, and somebody says, I don't think this is the time for you to study this. You can't start now standing up and throwing things around, getting all angry and saying, oh, what's this? Why are you not giving me knowledge for? Why are you, kitmanul ilm, you're hiding knowledge. And the Prophet ﷺ says this about kitmanul knowledge and hiding knowledge. So Imam Ghazali says, Save yourself from envy. Cleanse your heart from jealousy. Cleanse your heart from anger. And again, there are levels of anger which are good for you, and there are levels of anger that are bad for you. Just like jealousy, some is good for you, some is bad for you. Anger as well, some is good for you, some is bad for you. We've covered it many times. وَحُبُّ الشَّهْرَةِ. Do not have the love of shuhra, reputation, waljah, and prestige, honor, standing in society. Don't look for that kind of reputation amongst people. That should not be your focus. Don't go seeking after these things. Wal mal, and don't go seeking wealth. Especially for some. وَيَكُونُ طَالِبَ الطَّرِيقِ الْمُسْتَقِيمِ. Be a seeker of the straight path. الصراط المستقيم, الطريق المستقيم, the path that leads to Allah. Your focus and your target should be Allah. And so an ignorant individual, all of us have some level of ignorance within us. We don't know many things about this faith. And so when we are ignorant, we seek guidance. But while seeking guidance, we understand these few ideas of seeking guidance, of being a student. That we are intelligent in our approach and how we ask questions and who we seek for our knowledge. And we are understanding. But within ourselves, we cleanse ourselves of envy, of malice, of anger, of hatred, of love of standing and status and reputation and prestige and wealth. And we seek only Allah. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ سُؤَالُهُ وَاعْتِرَاضُهُ عَنْ حَسَدٍ وَتَعَنُّتٍ وَامْتِحَانٍ. When you question or query, when you go to a scholar and you ask a question, don't let it be out of your desire to test them. You're not there out of out of for wamtihan, for an imtihan, or ta'annutin, out of kind of hatred for them, and hasadin, out of jealousy of them. That should not be the objective of your question. How can you hope to benefit from your question if these are your intents? Allah gives according to intentions. وَهَذَا يَقْبَلُ الْعِلَاجِ. This individual can benefit. This individual can cure that ignorance. فَيَجُوزُ أَن تَشْتَغِلَ بِجَوَابِ سُؤَالِهِ. And for this individual, Imam Ghazali says, for the teacher, فَيَجُوزُ, now it is jaiz for you to respond to this individual. بَلْ يَجِبُ عَلَيْكَ إِجَابَتُهُ. Actually, it is obligatory for the teacher to respond to this individual. If an individual is any of the other three, shut them down. Imam Ghazali says, don't even give them a response. They need to learn that this method of questioning or this method of approaching the faith is harmful to them, it's detrimental to them. But that individual who comes with humility and asks, that individual who knows the methods of asking, that individual who comes to learn and sincerely to seek Allah, that individual, it's wajib for you to respond to. And this individual who comes with this intention, I will add something here, that your ignorance will then continue becoming less and diminishing, and your knowledge will continue increasing. And because of your sincerity, Allah will use you as a means to remove ignorance from other individuals and to bring knowledge into their lives. And so this is very, very important. Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi says, let me give you 8 pieces of advice. The first piece of advice he has already given. So we've covered that first piece of advice, right? This was all a side point, by the way. The first piece of advice he gave was, do not argue with anybody. Do not argue with anybody. The harms of argumentation, the harms of debating are much more than the benefits. It will lead to insincerity, envy, haughtiness, resentment, enmity, boastfulness, all of these other things. Riya, hasad, kibr, hiqd, adawa, mubahat, all of these other things. And then he went down this road of ignorance and the 4 types of ignorance, and what types of ignorance we need to avoid and what types of ignorance are beneficial in terms of curing and seeking knowledge. And now he comes to the second piece of advice. And his second piece of advice, which is what we will conclude on, no, the second piece of advice is actually extremely long, and so we will suffice there, inshallah. We will suffice there. I'll give you an introduction into what he's saying, and then he's going to give us and this is very, very important for us. This piece of advice, it's so needed, subhanallah. والثاني مما تدع, from the second thing that I want you to give up and that I want you to remove from your life, وأن تحذر من أن تكون واعظا ومذكرا لأن فيه آفات كثيرة. Subhanallah. The second piece of advice that he gives is that be very, very cautious and be on guard from the idea of becoming a wa'idh, a preacher, a mudhakkiran, an admonisher, somebody who teaches others and advises others. لأن فيه آفة كثيرة, because there are many harms in becoming somebody who preaches others. Now, there are benefits, but Imam Ghazali says there are harms, and he brings three words which suffices this idea that yes, continue if إلا أن تعمل بما تقول أولا. If you are practicing what you are teaching, if you are practicing what you're preaching, then there's no harm. There's no harm for you. ثم تعظ به الناس, then of course advise people as much as you want. فتفكر فيما قيل لعيسى عليه الصلاة والسلام. Think of what was said to Isa. Isa was told, يا ابن مريم, O son of Mary, عظ نفسك, preach to your own self, preach to yourself. فإن اتعظت فعظ الناس. Once you have learned the lessons and once you are able to practice, then preach to people. وإلا فاستحي من ربك. Otherwise, you should be ashamed of preaching in front of your Lord, in the presence of your Lord, that you don't have this. Now, we will expand on these ideas. We will expand on these ideas because a lot of questions come under this. That, sometimes people say that you should call people towards something and it will come into your life. Scholars have written that, when you're asked to do a lecture or to speak on something, speak on those things that you want to bring into your own life. And so you're preaching yourself. And so how can you preach at the same time you're not doing what you're trying to bring into your life? All of these ideas we'll be exploring, inshallah. And along with that, Imam Ghazali also says that if you want to kind of know when you're becoming problematic in your speech, you need to look out for two traits, two qualities, khaslatain. Right, this pretentiousness in speech and these other ideas that Imam Ghazali is going to break into and speak on, inshallah, which we will continue, inshallah, not next week, but the week after, inshallah. So next week, the Friday coming, we'll have the week off, inshallah. That session will be off. It's Eid next week. If you haven't done your sacrifice, your qurbani, your udhiyah, etc., please do so. If there are any questions, you can feel free to ask, inshallah. We'll conclude it there. So there won't be a session next week. But then the week after, inshallah, the session will be live and it will be in the masjid, and so that will be back in. It'll be live, inshallah. Any questions, inshallah? So no session next week, but there will be a session the week after, inshallah. If there's any questions, Eid related or any other questions, feel free to ask, inshallah, and then we will, inshallah, conclude. As-salamu wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. No? Let's wrap it up there, inshallah. Everybody seems to have had their questions answered. Alhamdulillah. No problem. We'll wrap it up there, inshallah. Yesterday was the death of a huge scholar, a scholar by the name of Mufti Ibrahim Desai, from South Africa, a giant scholar. Many scholars have benefited from him, from his. He teaches the Mufti course, the Ifta course in South Africa, and there was so many students who had studied under him, and he was, he had published so many books and so many articles and so many different things, and so many students who had experiences with him showed the testament of the individual that he was. His kind of comments, his interactions with the students, it was so powerful. It was so powerful. He students who had lost contact with him or who had kind of not messaged him for a long time. He, as a very senior scholar, would initiate that first point of contact and say, it's been a long time, I've not heard from you, or something like that. Or he'd send a book as a gift for that individual. And so he was somebody who, Allah had blessed this ummah. And you remember I mentioned recently that Mufti Taha Karan passed away. He was a huge scholar in South Africa. And so somebody had sent me a post saying that when Mufti Taha Karan passed away in South Africa, he was known as kind of one of the leading scholars in the Shafi'i school of fiqh. They said that the Shafi'i school have lost out today when Mufti Taha Karam passed away. And a few weeks later, not even that, Mufti Ibrahim Desai from the Hanafi school of thought has passed away. And they were very, very close with each other. And so the scholars have said that in the Hanafi school of thought has now felt a huge loss. And we say the Hanafi school of thought and the Shafi school of thought. Actually, the entire Ummah feels the loss of such individuals because, there's a really, really beautiful statement of, I can't remember who it is. It's in Riyadh al-Salihin. There's a statement about, عند ذكر الصالحين تنزل الرحمة. And when the remembrance of the pious individuals takes place, a special mercy from Allah descends. And you might have experienced this yourself. When you speak about scholars of the past and you hear about kind of their lives, a special mercy descends and you feel kind of, it lifts you up. You feel kind of motivated. You feel, ready to take on the world. And that's عند ذكر الصالحين تنزل الرحمة. But just by remembering the Salihin, the pious individuals of this ummah, a special mercy of Allah descends. Imagine the mercy that descends from the presence of these individuals. Being in the presence of these individuals. Just their mere remembrance causes so much rahmah. I think it was Sufyan al-Thawri who mentioned that statement, or Sufyan ibn Uyayna, one of these scholars, classical scholars. And so this is just by the mere mention. Imagine their presence, how much mercy descends, being in their presence, learning from them. Somebody who's constantly seeking knowledge, teaching knowledge, these types of individuals, the mercy of Allah descends in the presence of these individuals. And so a person should try and take benefit from as many scholars and students that you can, inshallah. What about somebody who has a question but doesn't know how to ask? The thing is, when it comes to asking questions, it's about gauging the situation. It's about gauging the situation. One of my teachers, Mufti Abdul Samad, very, very senior teacher of hadith. He's the founder and the principal of the seminary in Blackburn, Jami'atul Ilm al-Huda. He once told us a situation. So actually, there was a hadith that we read in Bukhari. And there was a comment of, I believe it was Umar radiallahu ta'ala, no, Abdullah ibn Umar, who wanted to ask a question. And they waited for a few months to get that question right, in the right position, in the right situation. Look, there's some questions where you have a fiqh question, right? You want to know about a ruling, you'll ask it whenever. But when you're asking a more personal question, sometimes you have a relationship with a teacher where you can ask a personal question. But you want to find that right moment. Maybe you're with them in Umrah, you're with them in Hajj, or you're with them in a travel or journey, and then you can kind of ask those questions that you wanted to ask, and those more personal questions. And so one of the companions spent months waiting for this question to ask. So our teacher, Mufti Abdul Samad, he mentioned to us that once when his teacher came, they came to Blackburn, he's a very senior teacher, Sheikh Yunus, an incident took place where there was a misunderstanding. And Sheikh Yunus, it seemed like Mufti Abdul Samad, my teacher, had it seemed that he had done something which was not according to the wishes of his teacher. But it wasn't the case. There was a misunderstanding that took place, and it wasn't at all that way. Mufti Abdul Samad, my teacher, wanted to explain to his teacher, Sheikh Yunus, for a long time that this wasn't the complication that took place. This isn't how it happened, and I didn't intend it like this. This is actually what happened, and this is the reality. He had waited for like a year, maybe I think it was 2 years, he mentioned. He was waiting. And one time he got the opportunity when he went for Umrah and his teacher was there. And he was on his own with his teacher. And his son, Muhammad Anas, who's now Maulana Muhammad Anas, very, very, Allah has gifted him, Allah has gifted all of his sons. And alhamdulillah, they're all serving the deen. Sheikh Muawiyah, Maulana Muhammad Anas, Sheikh Tawban, all of them. Allah has blessed them all. And so he says that I wanted to explain to my Sheikh in this moment. And I was going to just say in that moment that, this is what happened. And it wasn't like this. When my Sheikh said, his Sheikh turned around and said regarding that incident that, the way you interacted on this occasion, it wasn't the best way to interact. And his Sheikh brought it up. Now you have to comprehend the way Allah works, subhanAllah, that he is a year and a half later, things have moved on, they've forgotten about it. Obviously, as a student, you want to clear it up with the teacher. He's about to bring it up. His teacher has no idea, And Allah puts it in the Shaykh's heart to mention this. And then Mufti Abdul Samad just said, I didn't say anything after that. I just thought, subhanAllah, Allah puts into the hearts of his special friends these things. And so finding the right moment is essential. If for example, imagine a teacher is absolutely fuming and they're having a go at you for having done something wrong, right? And you haven't done that thing wrong. You might be in the right. Just take it in that moment. And then later on, just say, by the way, I think you misunderstood, or there was a misunderstanding, or maybe I came across in the wrong way. This is what actually happened. And the teacher in that moment will kind of feel, much more humbled, and they'll make dua for this individual. Whereas in that moment, they'll think you're just trying to make excuses. And this is one of the things I learned from that specific teacher, Mufti Abdul Samad. And no matter what would happen, senior scholars would come from across the globe, because he was an individual who had founded one of the leading kind of seminaries in the whole of the UK, right? Arguably in the whole of the world from the Islamic perspective. And when different scholars would come, they would have different temperaments. And no matter what would happen, no matter what the scholars would say to him, he would quietly take it and not kind of make a big hoo-ha or defend himself. And this was Mufti Abdul Samad. This was, I was extremely blessed to have him as a teacher. And, he's, alhamdulillah, may Allah grant him a long life. And he's producing many, many students, etc. But these are the kind of lessons that we learn. Sheikh Mu'adh, who is an imam, he's actually in the chat right now, and he's sent for love hearts. He will actually remember this incident because it was in the Darus of Bukhari. Mufti Abdul Samad mentioned this specific incident of, he wanted to tell Sheikh Yunus about the fact that there was a misunderstanding, and Sheikh Yunus himself turned around and said in Umrah that this happened. And he told us that he sent his son Muhammad Anas to go and get a sandwich, and Muhammad Anas went to get a sandwich because in those days you just would eat something or something like that. And so he had gone to in that time period. And so the question was really, I went off on a tangent, is sometimes you have a question, finding the right time to ask the question is very, very important. You might have a normal question, no problem. Text your local imam or the local scholar that you know and ask them the question, and they'll respond in their time, inshallah. However, sometimes there are questions or clarifications that are required that aren't necessarily the best time to do it in a public space. Not the best time to clarify your position on something which might have gone wrong in front of everybody. It might be best done in private, in being alone, or in a kind of you're in travel or in journey or somewhere like that or something like this, and then you can ask a more personal question. So khair, inshallah. Jazakallah for the question. If there are any other questions, we'll take it. Otherwise, we'll wrap up, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to benefit. Have an enjoyable Eid, inshallah. And inshallah, we'll see you not next week, but the week after, and it'll probably be back inside the masjid. So inshallah, it'll be